I guess I'll go ahead and I'll get started here. I'm Jon Kay. I'm the director of a statewide folk arts program that's based at Indiana University. I've been here since 2004 and worked as a folklorist for a lot longer than that. Um, and Basically, my presentation today is going to be talking about a series of programs that we've been doing specifically geared towards older adults. And so the first section, I'll be reading a little bit to kind of get us going here, and hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation. But let me share my screen. Somebody's sharing their screen already, and only one person can at a time. So there, somebody just turned it off then. Thank you. By 2020, people aged 65 and older will outnumber children under the age of 5 for the first time in human history. And by 2050, the population in the United States aged 65 and older will be 83.7 million, nearly double current population estimates. Once I heard this projection, I asked myself if my state, where I live here in Indiana, was ready for the cultural changes that lie ahead. I dug a little bit more and I discovered in the 2015 Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index for older adults that they placed Indiana at 46 out of 50 states in its ranking of health and wellness of older adults. I wondered how my work as a public humanist could help this major cultural transition, and perhaps even improve my state's depressing quality of life ranking for older adults. This has pushed me to host a few public humanities and aging programs that I think work to support older adults. For over 25 years, I've worked as a folklorist, documenting and presenting folk artists and tradition bearers. This work has frequently led me to collaborate with the oldest generation, who are often the keepers of traditional knowledge and traditional arts, the stewards of cultural practices, and the storytellers of their communities. It's not just that they've lived a long time and retained traditional knowledge. Many revived, adopted, or invented their creative practices only after they retired, lost a loved one, or experienced some other rupture in their everyday lives. Based upon my public folklore work, I've learned that the arts and humanities can be an important strategy for living a resilient life. In the introduction to my book, The Expressive Lives of Elders, I write that folklore and art are our adaptive repertoire for dealing with our everyday encounters and problems. They're not just the ephemera of our culture, but rather our creative core, our cultural competency for handling whatever life may throw at us. At its best, this is what public humanities programs and projects can foster and support. Not just the study of history and culture for scholarly interest, but the humanities for humanity, where our work can encourage sociability, foster meaningful engagement, and create a context where participants can share their expertise, knowledge, and skills. Throughout my career, I've hosted public humanities projects that highlight the folk life of older adults. Much of that time, I wasn't really focused on the age, but I was focused on the community folklore, the traditional practices as expression of that community or that group. Uh, my work documenting and presenting folkways often resulted in me collaborating, though, with the oldest generation. It was during my research into local lifeways that I started thinking about why so many of my informants and interlocutors were over 65. Was it the baggage of my discipline? Could be, it's folklore, you know. The fact that we seek out elders, this may be true. But I began to recognize that traditional arts, local history, cultural demonstrations are often deployed by older adults to help them fill their time in a productive and meaningful way. I'm sure that many of you have hosted public humanities programs and recognize that elders are often our most enthusiastic participants and make up our most dedicated audiences. How many times have we collected an oral history with a veteran, presented a program with a traditional artist, or hosted a workshop with a community member and have had the feeling that our collaborators had waited a long time for someone to ask them about their experiences or to share their talents or to join in the work? But far too often, public programs are directed at people rather than co created with them. Since the reflexive turn of the 1970s and 80s, our scholarly endeavors have slowly moved towards shared authority and pluralistic perspectives. In addition, some public scholars have developed models that move beyond humanities scholars as speakers to humanities scholars as facilitators, carefully assisting and guiding groups through important conversations, creating contexts where community members can share their experiences, knowledge, and skills. Creative aging programs have emerged as a tool for improving the well being and quality of life of older adults. In these programs, the arts are deployed for their therapeutic value and to encourage social engagement. Through reporting on some successfully proven programmatic models, this session aims to illustrate that notions of creative aging are as much about the humanities, that is, the memory, history, cultural knowledge, and social engagement, as it is about the arts. This session contends that, like the arts, the humanities can be leveraged as a cultural intervention to address the problems that commonly challenge older adults. When I originally proposed the session, I had intended to invite elders to the conference and host a workshop through demonstrating one of our creative aging models, but then the pandemic changed things. Getting elders on Zoom has proved to be a little more difficult than I had thought. And nearly all of the elders who I intended to present are not computer savvy and live in rural communities where dependable internet access remains a struggle. In fact, even for me, I had to drive in from where I live out in the country into campus so I could make sure that y'all could hear me today. So, with all this in mind, so instead, I'll try to describe the public programs that I facilitate and share a few video excerpts that I believe will illustrate and illuminate these efforts. This will take the first half of the allotted time, and then I hope that we can have a conversation about public humanities programs and aging, and maybe strategize some ways that we might be able uh, to build upon this. Because I don't claim to have all the answers; I just have some models. While I've often worked with older adults and collaborators, I didn't start hosting folk life and aging summits until 2013 when I partnered with the Columbus Area Arts Council to host a cultural show and tell program. At the event, local elders brought examples of their art making projects and personal keepsakes to share with the group. From quilts made from family clothing and embroidery showing local landmarks to watercolor paintings and personal scenes and buildings carved in wood, I was moved by how the pieces they made communicated local histories. They shared family stories and they expressed values and beliefs, the values and beliefs of the elders. While several of the participants in this initial session uh, were impressive, two stand out, and I want to share those some little bit about them with you. I had met Gus before. He was a Dutch Indonesian immigrant from the island of Maluku who had moved to the US in the 1960s to work in the Cummins engine manufacturing in Columbus, Indiana. He had served in World War II. In fact, he had spent most of the war in a series of prisoner of war camps, and he'd helped build the infamous bridge on the River Kwai and the Hellfire Pass, both of which were part of the Japanese Imperial Railway in the borderlands of Burma and Thailand. Once he retired, Gus wanted to share the stories of his imprisonment, but his thick accent and limited English language skills made it difficult. So, to aid in the telling of stories, he took up painting and displayed the work at area veterans museums where he would go each Tuesday and talk to visitors about his experiences. At the gathering I hosted, he displayed examples of his work, aiming to help tell his stories. Yes, his work was art, but it was much more than that, too. He was a kind of citizen historian, aiming to educate the public about his life in the war. The other elder at the workshop was Bob Taylor, and I had never met him before. He had started carving wood when he was 8 years old, using a pocket knife his grandfather gave him. Once grown, Bob apprenticed as a pattern maker, and from engineered drawings, he carved prototypes that manufacturers used to produce molds for making metal castings. While carving professionally, he continued to whittle for his own enjoyment. When Bob retired, he began creating what he called memory carvings that reflect upon his life. That is, church festivals, family outings, a circus train. I want to share with you just a video clip of that first event in Columbus, Indiana, where I met Bob. And I'll apologize for the shaky footage, but it was kind of shot on the fly with just a digital camera that I just happened to have been holding in my hand, DSLR at the time. So I'll play at least a little bit of this.
And all of that. But since I've been retired now, I've been doing memory carvings from my childhood. And so the trip that I brought this time to show is a trip that we took in 1941 in June. We got on a train here in Columbus. We went to Cincinnati. They met us with buses, took us down to the docks. We got on a riverboat and we went to Coney Island, which was about 15 miles east of Cincinnati. They gave us ride tickets. We had packed a lunch, which we ate. Usually, I think we ate it on the boat. I was 8 at the time, so a lot of this was real foggy, so I had to go back and do some research. But I tried to, I went to the Historical Society to find out whether they knew anything about this, because I remember doing it, but exactly what it looked like, that's something else. And they had no idea, hadn't heard about it. They sent me over to see Harry McCauley at the newspaper. He said I didn't come here till '63, so this was before my time. So, but he ran an article in the Republic then, and about an hour after the paper hit the street, a lady called me and she said, "I'm a little older than you, but I was on that trip." And Compass put out a souvenir paper after the trip, and I have one, and if you want to come by and make a copy of it, you're welcome to it. So this is a copy of the paper that they put out, special edition. So from that,
I'm gonna stop it there. It's a much longer clip where he flips over the boards. You can hear the audience's excitement about what he shows. But I want to show another video that I made that kind of shows Bob a little bit more, talking about the stories, and you can see this kind of connection between history and the art that he makes in that.
I'm Bob Taylor, live here in Columbus, Indiana. Have most of my life, except 4 years I was in the Air Force. I've always been interested in wood and doing things with my hands. Since I retired, I've been doing what I call memory carvings of my childhood. That's what I enjoy. I try to put me in all the pictures that I'm carving because they are my memories, and I hope that it will help people somewhere down the line to understand what it was like living here as a child. Well, the story behind this carving took place in the late 1940s, there was a train came into Columbus, and I lived 3 blocks from what we called the circus grounds, which actually was our baseball diamond when the circus wasn't in town. So the train, it said in an article in the newspaper, was almost a mile long that came to Columbus. And so this is my rendition of the circus train parked fairly close to the circus grounds, and they're unloading animals. And my friend and I are standing there watching, wondering whether if we watered the elephant, we could get a free ticket. Many years ago, when I was about 8, we used to go to the fair where Fair Oaks Mall is right now. And when we arrived there, there was a truck by the entrance and a wood carver on a platform explaining what he had in the truck, which he called the history of steam. He came out on the platform, made a few cuts in a little piece of wood, and made a pair of pliers out of them. I thought that was really cool, so I wanted to see him do that again. So that's kind of where my interest started in doing something with wood. When I was in the service in Waco, Texas, I was an assistant scoutmaster, and at that time we wore neckerchiefs. And
I'll stop that one there as well. Sorry that we can't show all of them, but I'm happy to share the links to these to anybody that wants them. As you can see from these clips, Bob's creative practice is about much more than art making. He talks about personal and local history, transportation, memory, research methods, and much more. Work like Bob's art are in and of themselves kind of vernacular humanities projects. After meeting Bob at the Mill Race Center, I went on to host him in a variety of public programs at area museums, state parks, libraries. It was at these events that I noticed that Bob used his carvings as a way to connect with other people and to share important life stories. His works are not art for art's sake, but rather material forms of life review and an ingenious history telling strategy. Well, the art that Gus and Bob brought to the gathering told stories visually. They cast the elder as storyteller, allowing them to perform their stories for others. In fact, most of the elders who attended the event had stories they wanted to tell, and the pieces they brought aimed to facilitate that. That was the first workshop. That first workshop was an early effort to explore the ideas that would later be featured in my book, The Folk Art and Aging. Uh, since that book was released, I've traveled throughout the United States doing book talks, often encouraging elders to bring examples of their art making projects. Over and over, I've witnessed how elders use their arts, collections, photographs, and family mementos to launch into stories. One time when I was in Dallas, Texas, I met Anita, a woman who had transformed the keys that once opened various doors around her family's ranch into a meaningful statue of a cross mounted upon a base made in the shape of her ranch's brand. She used the small creation to recall and share stories of home. This was after she had had to sell the home place to move into the retirement village where she lived. Workshops like the one in Columbus and Dallas create a context where elders can share memories, talk about history, and express traditional knowledge. Uh, we create a context where they are the program. We're not doing a program to them or at them. Gerontologists have warned that many elders throughout the United States are challenged by three persistent problems. That is, the feelings of isolation, boredom, and helplessness. Often, over the past 2 years, I've worked to cultivate my observations from those early workshops to produce public humanities programs that can inform elders about these common challenges and then using a folk life perspective, discuss strategies for resisting them. The organization I direct, Traditional Arts Indiana, is a statewide folk life program that receives support from Indiana University and the Indiana Arts Commission, a branch of state government. Over the past few years, we've instituted folk life and aging workshops where we work with community centers and elders service organizations to present these events. Our first program we called the Traditional Arts and Creative Aging Summit, which was convened at Indiana University at the Mathers Museum of World Cultures. We had just completed a 3-month survey of traditional arts of older adults in 3 counties in South Central Indiana: Owen, Greene, and Orange counties. About 30 elders attended the gathering, and each brought examples of their art making and creative pursuits. Songs, quilts, poetry, doll making were just a few of the expressive forms that participants brought to share. As a microphone passed around the room, each participant took turns introducing themselves and talking about the items they brought. As each elder finished, I asked a follow up question, much like I would do if I was conducting an interview in my fieldwork. Uh, who, who do you make that for? Who do you play your music with? Uh, have you shared this with the next generation? Have you passed this on to anyone? How does this make you feel when you play this music or make this craft? My questions often led to a collective conversation about the 3 plagues of aging: isolation, boredom, and helplessness. How playing traditional music may forge social bonds, how quilting groups keeps the feelings of loneliness at bay, or how a craft may foster a sense of mastery, or how telling a story can be a generative act, the idea of guiding that next generation or guiding future generations. At this iteration of the workshop, I also presented members of a poetry group from the senior living community. An elder care arts coordinator came, and a music teacher who specialized in working with older adults was also there. In addition, this was all in addition to my presentation of the show and tell model. What we discovered was that the participants wanted more time to talk about their art, the struggles they faced, how did they dealt with them. They wanted to learn from their peers. While the attendees enjoyed the arts programming, it was the stories that they left talking about. It was not the art of the arts, but the humanities in the arts that gave them significance. With this in mind, our next summit centered on making programs more interactive, expanding the discussion around the show and tell, and having a collective conversation about what could be done to improve the quality of life of the participants and their friends and neighbors. This event was held in the small town of Ferdinand, Indiana, a historically German Catholic community. In the meeting room of the public library next to the large historic St. Meinrad's Arch Abbey, we convened about 50 older adults. Again, musicians, craftspeople, and local historians came to share their interest and to learn more about this topic of creative aging. Where the earlier gathering was more arts focused, this one was more centered around community engagement. Several talked about the local dialect of German that was quickly passing out of practice and how much of the local history was still held in the minds of the oldest generation. They also discussed at length how local traditions are a comfort for them, but also how they help them throughout their daily life. A local harmonica player who is in his 80s shared how much of the tunes that he learned from his father, what they meant to him, and how continuing the tradition has helped him as he's gotten older. Having only partial lung capacity, his doctor encouraged him to keep playing the harmonica. He played old waltzes and schottisches and fiddle tunes that were once popular at area dances. Not only did he play these old tunes to help with his breathing, but Mr. Begley also contends that it keeps his mind sharp. He explains, I think it's good for your mind. I hum songs all the time. I have to get every note in my head because when I play, I have to know every little note. For years, He played harmonica, the old German tunes at nursing homes and at senior centers. And he saw firsthand how arts and history programs improve the well-being of older adults. He recalled, "We probably played close to 20 years in nursing homes all together. I've seen one man get out of his wheelchair, take his oxygen off, and stand up and just wiggle around. He could not sit there any longer. He was probably a dancer." So I asked the question, so what? Why does any of this matter? They're kind of fun little stories about these people. This is my friend Dennis, Reverend Dennis Freeman. He's a African American gospel pianist, and we're doing several projects with him, and it kind of brings front and center the point I want to make here. The effectiveness of these programs is in part due to the fact that they're culturally specific. They're rooted in particular communities and in particular places. People are the experts of their local culture. So we've strived to make all of our work community specific because uh, that's the part that these older adults really resonate with. Um, and that's also what led us to end up creating a booklet I want to tell you about, our Memory, Art, and Aging Resource and Activity Guide. The 80-page booklet is a 8.5 by 11 page full color book. It's 80 pages and it contains 40 elder spotlights and that tell the story of inspiring elders and their creative pursuits. And each aims to inspire and teach important lessons to the readers. In addition, the book includes 17 activities. You look at this one here. This is an example that each of the activities works to encourage the well-being of elders. Some are designed specifically for individuals, but others have options for how you can use them for groups. So here's the one I picked for that features Bob Taylor. So we have this story that talks about Bob and the art that he makes, and people might think, "Oh, I could never do something like that. That's not what I do." But then on the other side, there's this activity of making memory maps, and kind of breaks it down to where there's this activity that they could do that could help them with life review, help them with recollection. You could do it with friends and family to improve sociability, and so we kind of paired the two things together, these uh, inspiring profiles, but then activities that correspond to them. And I could show you several of these, and I'll share with you at the end. I'll try to paste into the chat a link where you can download a free PDF copy, as well as a link where you can, if you fill out the form, I'll happily mail you a copy of the resource guide so you can see what it is that we do. And I could talk about each one of these, and I can always come back to them if you choose. But finally, I want to talk about one additional program that we've done that I think kind of speaks to the ability of us to do this type of work. Uh, Outside the door to many independent living and assisted living apartments, there are these shelves. My parents lived in an assisted living apartment. They had these shelves outside their doors. Residents commonly use these shelves for finding their way around their new community. They transform these kind of mundane entryways into personal spaces. Everybody's door looks the same, but by dressing up these shelves, you're able to individualize your space. From found objects and pictures of grandchildren to holiday decorations and art projects, these shelves can say a lot about the person who lives there. What was their job? Where are they from? What do they value? These shelves are both creative expressions and provide a chance for elders to connect with other residents. Gene Ship lives in an assisted living apartment complex here in Bloomington, Indiana. On the shelf outside his door, he proudly displays his Army helmet, a small American flag, a toy Jeep, and a tank. He explains that the decorated ledge displays some of the equipment associated with his work of being a master sergeant. I served my country, recalls the 101-year-old veteran. Drafted into military service in 1941, just after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He would remain in the Army for 30 years. He served in three wars: World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam. And over the years, I've watched as the elder periodically changed, rearranged, and added to his shelf, which always garners attention from visitors and his fellow residents. Like Mr. Ship, most of the residents in this complex place personal items on these shelves outside their doors. Some displays hold seasonal decorations, art projects, and family photographs. Mr. Ship's displays reflects his life story. The residents curating these displays can facilitate life review and improve sociability by introducing residents to their ever-changing community of neighbors. They also remind elders of the experiences and help present their personalities, interests, and stories to others. For the past several years, I've taken my Indiana folklore class uh, to the apartment complex to work with the elders, documenting their shelves, recording their stories, and creating posters about the elders based upon their discoveries. Both the students and the residents love this activity. Working with the staff of the assisted living apartment building, we identify elders who want to participate in the project. Some have participated several times, such as Mr. Ship. We tell the residents that students will be documenting their shelves and to interview them about their lives, which often encourages the elders to spruce up their shelves, update the photographs of their grandchildren, replace the seasonal decorations, or augment the space in some other way. We pair the students with the elder, keeping in mind that the students and the older adults' interests. Then the students interview the resident, photograph the shelf, all the while probing the stories behind the elder's display. Then the students produce a poster and write a paper about the resident and their shelf. Finally, students return to their apartment complex. I buy punch and cookies, and we have a festive afternoon of student presentations for the elders in the apartment. Again, I ask, so what? Why does this matter? The residents who participate in the program get to practice what gerontologists call generativity. I used that word a little bit earlier. That is the care and the guiding of the next generation. The idea is that they can leave a legacy. Now, this is not just, this is something that is uh, a cultural prerequisite that people feel like they want to guide that next generation, and we have to afford them the opportunity to at least experience that in some way. Often older adults complain that no one listens to them anymore. To have students fully engage with the residents and then tell their stories back to them is very gratifying. They feel like they've been heard. One year, when I was facilitating the program, a volunteer at the building approached me. She said that her mother had participated in the program a few years earlier and she had passed away. And she thanked me and said how much her mother loved meeting the students, telling her stories, and having that special poster made about her life. It was an impactful class assignment. For the students, many of whom admitted that they were afraid of old people, having not grown up with any grandparents living close by. It was a chance for them to learn firsthand and to recognize their own ageism and fears. In addition, students learned interviewing techniques, how to make curatorial decisions about the present, and to present in what to present in their posters. Those are just a few of the programs that Traditional Arts Indiana has been working on over the past few years. Of course, COVID has brought much of that work to almost a screeching halt. Um, on the front end of the workshop, on the front end of the pandemic, we worked to complete the resource guide. We finished in editing and we're planning the distribution of it uh, with the hopes that it would abate and we'd be able to go back to doing these creative aging workshops. Uh, but we've not been able to do that, especially given the vulnerability of older adults to the virus. We're not able to take students into senior living apartments now. Uh, and so we're not able to do that program. But in January, we're piloting a virtual version, or we're going to try to. of a Folk Life and Aging Summit with African American elders in Indianapolis who wanted to participate in a program. We're partnering with the Asante Arts, an organization that serves diverse elders in Indianapolis, and we hoped to use Zoom, and we'll be monitoring the success and the limitations and the obstacles associated with that. But anyway, these are just a few of the examples of folk life and aging work that Traditional Arts Indiana is doing. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and to learn about programs that your organizations and communities may be offering. So if you want to get I'm not sure if I can copy and paste this here, but I'll be able to do it once I stop doing that. Okay. Anyway, so hopefully we're back together. So I welcome your conversations. I'm getting ready to paste a link to the guide in there, and I see there's lots of things in the chat I'll read. But I just pasted the link. No, actually, I'll paste it to everyone, not just George. So if you want to download the PDF, you're welcome to do that. So let me check with the chat first, and then I'm going to welcome you all to open up, unmute yourselves, and we can have a conversation if you like. I'll share the links to the Bob Taylor work as well. I'll try to do that at the very end. Hopefully we'll have a conversation about COVID. That was one of the things. As I said, a lot of it's coming to a halt. People are asking for the booklet. Use students to help with elders with. We have talked about using students to help with elders using the Zoom. So that would possibly be one possibility of doing this. So are these humanities programs? Are these, do you see this as the type of work that we should be doing, like in our humanities councils, in the work that we've been, that we traditionally do? Is health and well-being, is that at the heart of the work that we do? Or is that on the fringe? Yeah, that's great if that happens naturally, but that's not what we do. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to unmute and share.
Hi, I'm from
Sandy.
Colorado. I really loved the phrase that you used. I wrote it down: humanities in the arts. I mean, that is what made the arts compelling and meaningful. And I was thinking about that, and that's because, you know, we always get the humanities, the arts and humanities. And I try to do some fundraising for our council, and it always comes out that the arts is much sexier, you know, much more easily understood. So I really glommed on that little bit because it's really true.
Well, we don't talk about words as being either arts or humanities. They can be used both ways, and these much of these visual elements, these things that people make, aim to communicate and to share cultural information. And so very much that's the humanities part of it. I'll be the first to say I loved Gus Potoff to death, but he wasn't a great artist. If we were jurying him by art's sake, that wasn't the point. We would have missed it. It was all about him telling his stories. And that was just part of what his art was about.
Well, you know, I think that's the point of art anyway, right across the board. I mean, there's the marketable art that's worth thousands of dollars because you have the right credentials and the right learning history. And then there's the reality of art, which is way beyond that. Right. Plus the history in humanity history is the humanities in Bob's art, in all of their art is just amazing.
There was a cult during the WPA era, and after there was a scholar, Alan Eaton, probably some of you know his work, and he wrote about the fact that someday in the future we will judge art by how it looks and what it is, but also we'll judge it by what it does in our lives, not by what it does. The making of art, the making of craft becomes greater than what that craft actually, the utility of it. There's a greater utility. So I'd welcome some other thoughts, perspectives. Is anybody else doing arts and aging programs, not arts, but humanities and aging programs in your work? Even intentionally or unintentionally? Christina.
Yeah, I love, John, thank you so much. This has really given me a lot to think about today. And as I think about our work at Nevada Humanities in Nevada, one of the things that we've been doing over the past few years is shifting our kind of understanding of what the humanities is in a public context. So less about sort of an understanding of the academic disciplines of the humanities and more about the humanities as lived. And the work that you are doing fits directly into that concept for us. And so I really appreciate seeing this and helping sort of expand that concept for us and our staff. And so I think this ties into what Sandy was saying, sort of, I think different councils have different ways of handling the issue of sort of the arts versus the humanities. We tend to think of creativity as embedded in the humanities and that they're not really necessarily divisive in that way, if we can use that word. But I think, one of the nice things about the humanities is that it gets you the opportunity to own everything. So
Right.
We can set it all up and interpret it, as the best we can. And I think that what you're talking about is the perfect example of that. We've been doing programs involving, we were nominated ourselves for a Schwartz Prize for a program that we're doing called Humanities Heart to Heart, which is unmediated voices of Nevadans talking about COVID-19 experiences throughout the state. So it's a very similar thing in the sense that it's personal voices coming forward and talking about the context of their experiences. And so that's something that we've been doing. And I'm also like you, I'm curious to hear how other councils are handling kind of unmediated and direct creativity or experiences, stories, straight to the source things rather than the kind of mediated scholarly voice interpreting the thing and presenting it. I think that's sort of the core of what you're talking about, is that direct experience coming forward. And there's so much value in that. Our project Humanities Heart to Heart was actually funded by our local hospital system because for the same reasons that you're talking about, which is that it's about mental health
Right.
and well-being and community well-being. And we were able to work with them, which they came forward and were like, we want to fund this because this is about bringing forward voices and connection in ways that are deeply meaningful for Nevadans. So I think there is a place for that in humanities councils, very much so. And I'm curious what other people think too.
Other people? Chime in. George unmuted, so go for it.
Well, I will say it's interesting, John, because, with CARES Act funding that we got this spring, the NEH really has been cracking down on us. And I speak as the director of grants in Indiana. The NEH is really cracking down on us and making clear that we are not supposed to be funding arts organizations. We are not supposed to be funding the creation of art, whether that is, painting, sculpture, literature. So we're in an interesting time when the NEH is sort of forcing us to draw a line, and I don't think it's that easily drawn. So I'm glad you're having this conversation. It's interesting to hear what others are saying and the approach that they're taking to this, especially since we are, it seems like, under increased pressure to delineate between the arts and the humanities. My personal philosophy is, if you were to come to me, John, and ask for a grant to, for the creation of the art, no, but what you're doing, encouraging them to be creative and then talk and to share and to put the art in context and tell the history of the art, to me, that's perfectly in alignment with what we want to do. But I do note that there is this increasing pressure on us from the National Endowment for the Humanities to make that distinct line.
Right. And that's why I tend to, we tend to go after NEA funding to do the type of work that we do. We tend to go after Arts Commission funding to support what it is that we do. But at my core, I see myself more as a humanist than I do as a artist or an arts person. Even though I do a lot with arts, so I feel that has, since the founding of the endowments, there's been this schism between the two. And part of what I was trying to do is point a way that we might be able to, in a nuanced way, move forward and past that, at least not towards the creation of art, but actually towards this kind of arts as expressive practices. Now, because of the work that we've been doing, because my program is Traditional Arts Indiana, I focus a lot on people creating things. This could be just something as easily as family photographs, encouraging people to bring those in and doing the same type of thing, or family stories. You could do the same type of program. That doesn't always have to be art. And being a folklorist, I'll be the first to say, when I say art, I work with people that make split rail fences. I work with storytellers. I mean, it's the whole shooting match. All type of expressive forms are what I'm looking at.
John,
Yes.
thank you so much for your presentation today. And on a personal note, I'll just say, every time you said, "What's the so what of it?" all I could hear was Barry Tolkien saying that, because that's what he always said. So what's the so what of it? But I think to the point that George and I think Christina and you were saying, isn't it interesting today, if you guys were listening in on Jason Reynolds' conversation with Andrea Lewis, how he said, what is he buying to help working? Art books about art. And it's not that he's an artist. He's not going to, write a book about art per se, but that is what is stimulating him. So that's that idea where the conversation about something, what is behind it, or the so what behind it is, it'd be like, cutting off your one arm and your other arm and saying, okay, help me out, sew this back on humanities and sew this back on arts. Doesn't work that way. And I think in all of our councils, I'm thinking about just sitting in on, Georgie made me think about this in the CARES, and I'm a board member at Utah Humanities, and sitting in on, and being one of the team that helped figure out how to spend the CARES Act grant money that we got in Utah. And sometimes these were the conversations we were having. It's not that this isn't humanities, but figuring out, how to maybe message it to the people that gave us the money, because you can't pull those two things apart.
Definitely. I am seeing that there was another, thank you so much for that. I never met him, but I've definitely read a lot of his work. So it makes me feel good that you heard that in my my thing. Felicia Kelly put a note in there. Several years ago, we supported a project out of the University of San Francisco English department that paired students with homebound seniors enrolled in Meals on Wheels, and the students did written and video oral histories that was shared with the library program, contextualization and facilitated discussion, as well as provided DVDs to the seniors and the personal and family. That could, I think that you're absolutely right that could be used in a COVID type of situation to kind of bridge that. If you're able to get older adults who use a platform like Zoom, and the students could link up with them to do these type of oral history work. I think I've done a lot of field work through the computer over the past few months. So any other comments, questions, any other programs that you all have done that you would like to talk about? Any concerns about what this might do. This type of programming, does it dilute the greater mission of what we're supposed to be doing? I don't think so, or I wouldn't be doing it. But I'm being devil's advocate here.
I think it enhances it. And also, I want to ask, we do program partnering for all our collaborative program partnering with organizations throughout the state for ours. What about partnering with organizations or institutions that work with or are for elder people? And I've learned that elder is not a good word to use. It's not very PC for us old folks. But working with them in order to provide the technology and the venue for older folks to learn how to Zoom.
Yes, I think that would be perfect. I should say, when I'm doing these workshops, I preface everything about saying when I use elder, I mean it like in its tribal sense.
Yeah.
Elders used to be a seat of privilege and an appreciation, not elderly. But I think you're right. I think doing more work and being able to facilitate and train these older adults, maybe community resource centers, Meals on Wheels, they're providing way more than meals these days, that they might be able to help with some of this work. That was one of the reasons we created the Memory, Art, and Aging Guide, was to make legible the work that we were doing in communities. So we could go to them and we could say, here's what we do. Can you look at this? Tell us what your thoughts are. How can we work together to put this into the hands of older adults? Not just give them a book, but actually come into the community and make a supplemental copy that features the people that participate in the workshop that we do with you. And so it's not a static book, but it can actually keep getting these kind of appendices added to them. So, any other questions, comments? I think we have just a few more minutes with this. Everything that I've been talking about has been focused around this idea that traditional arts, folk life research, folklore research are powerful tools for connecting with older adults. I think I'm sure this is my discipline speaking at this point to me. I see that as kind of almost a unique vantage point of between the arts and history, culture, that we have all of this coming together. I would love to hear, how might this be adapted to other humanities disciplines? Is the work that I'm doing here, is it distinctly folklore and humanities, or is it something that is translatable to the other work, the other fields and disciplines? Gloria?
John?
Yes.
Yes. I serve on the board of the Federation, and I co-chair the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, racial, we've got a new name for it now. But anyway, let me back up and say that I've been jumping around this morning from group to group, so I didn't hear all of it. But what I did hear, I'm very, very pleased with, because I think often, because of the language and the definitions between arts and the humanities, that some of our funders, and I don't understand this, but some of our funders tend to get confused, because humanities is the arts. And arts is humanities, and all of it is human and cultural. And often growing up, depending on how you were raised and what your ethnicity or your color was, for me, growing up as a little colored girl in mostly white Muskegon, Michigan, I was considered, depending on who defined it, elitist by some and bougie by others. So here we go with this language again, and it always confused me. And talking to my parents about it, my mother always said, you are who you are what you are because of us. And that made me remember that my great granny in Shreveport used to draw a lot. And that's one of my earliest memories of the arts. And going to my first museum, going to my first library, going to a book club. I didn't think of it as a club, but I just thought of it as reading. And all of that happened during my K through 6, and did not understand until I went to Chicago to school that all of that had to do with my cultural identity. And I think that's one of the reasons why I proposed to our then president of the Federation that we needed to have more discussion, more sharing of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of people see that as race only. And that is not so. Race does play a very major part in it because of our founding of these United States. So yes, we can't leave race out, but by the same token, we have to have some commonality between the other pillars of all of this. When you start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are talking about the humanities. And we are talking about having councils to reach out and be very, very inclusive of including others in these stories. And that takes us back to this whole idea of aging, because depending on how I feel any day, I feel like I'm old at 80. There are other times I feel like, oh my God, aging isn't so good after all because I'm aching. So everybody's definition of aging is very different, but including our young people to be very comfortable with this intergenerational aspect of life, because things are so rapid nowadays that young people don't really connect with their grandparents. Everybody lives far apart, and everybody has something in front of them doing like this. And so I think that the humanities and all of our councils, and I like the fact that many of the councils have changed their name and have humanities in it, is going to help us be more inclusive to those stakeholders that we reach out to.
Right.
And so I'm very careful here in Montgomery County. I chair the Veterans Committee for Montgomery County. And so I'm very careful to make sure that with the older veterans, I do a lot of listening, because many of them don't want to talk about their past. They don't want to talk about their feelings of what happened to them during these different wars and campaigns that we have.
Right.
And the younger veterans just have tuned out a lot of things. Because I was a neuropsychiatric nurse in the Navy, and I was at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And it was very, very difficult to get the men to talk about what happened to them in Vietnam, because it was quick for some doctor to mark the box and they get a dishonorable discharge, because we kept everything so secret. We didn't know the name Agent Orange, most of us in the civilian world, but it was very, very real. And so when they talked about it, they were suppressed from talking about it. I come from that era that you talk about it.
Right.
So I think that when we do our programming, we have to be very careful to do listening, and we have to make things very calming, not only for our aging persons, but for the younger ones too, because they're dealing with a lot of trauma. So arts and storytelling and all of the collective things that counselors are responsible for doing, it's an awesome lot of work, but I think it's wonderful work. So
Well,
I just wanted to say that.
well, thank you very much. There's a lot there, and I thank you for sharing that. I think that there's just a lot of goes back to this idea of being so place-based and community-based in the work that we're doing, and I find that is meeting people where they are, giving them what they need, and I think veterans would be a great example of that. That type of work. There's a great PBS show, Craft in America. Watch the service episode. It's all about arts in military service. Great video. One of my favorites. I think we're quickly running out of time here, or out of time. Is Cassie with us still?
Yep. Yeah, we do need to end the session now.
Okay. Well, thank you all, everyone. Please feel free to email me in the chat. I've pasted the videos and the PDF link for you there as well. So if you want to grab that by the end. So thank you all very much.